Montreal, I'm Jana Solden from Curtin University, Perth, Western Australia. The purpose of my study, as you can see from the title of my presentation, is to empirically evaluate the psychometric properties of the DPS, specifically the extent to which a four-dimensional solution is consistent with the priori scale definition and to assess the internal consistency of its subscales. Let me tell you more about the original scale. The scale was developed by Michelle Moore-Barak and her colleagues in 1998 in North America using the sample of 2,686 employees in a high-tech company. It was designed to measure employees' views about the diversity climate in the organization. It consists of 16 items measuring two main dimensions, each dimension containing two factors. So it is a multi-dimensional scale consisting of 4 factors. Their study concluded that the DPS exhibits acceptable reliabilities and internal consistencies. So why did I conduct this study? First of all, the Australian workforce has become increasingly diverse in terms of gender, age, ethnicity, race, and nationality, and it is likely to continue into the future. As a result, there is an increasing interest among scholars in issues of diversity in organizations, particularly diversity climate. Despite the growing interest, empirical research on this concept is scarce, and the scarcity has been attributed to the lack of a valid and reliable instrument. So therefore, Moore-Barak and her colleagues were the first ones to introduce the scale. However, the scholars have failed to empirically evaluate its validity. We don't know for sure whether the scale is applicable in or transferable to the Australian context. On the other hand, Kosek and Zonia conceptualized the diversity climate as employees' perceptions of an organization's diversity-related policies, practices, and procedures. We all know that diversity policies in Australia are different from those in the USA. Even within Australia, diversity programs vary from one organization to another. So I believe it is context-specific, so therefore there was a need for me to assess its psychometric quality in an Australian context. So how did I go about it? I conducted a study in one of the Australian public sector organisations simply because diversity management appears to be prominent across Australian public sector than private sector. And yes, this study was a part of a larger study. A total of 391 employees and managers participated in my study. Prior to distributing the questionnaire, I piloted the scale with 20 employees of the agency. As a result, 2 items were eliminated. That's because layoffs do not occur in the Australian Public Service and the agency did not have mentoring programs in place. So these 2 items were irrelevant and omitted. 1 item was slightly modified as participants were confused about its meaning. So following these changes, employees were asked to complete the DPS using a 7-point Likert scale ranging from 1 strongly disagree to 7 strongly agree. So these 2 sets of analysis were conducted. As you can see from this table, I anticipated from 2 factors and 4 factors and 4 factors emerge, suggesting that the resultant groupings correspond well with the original groupings of Moore-Barak and her colleagues. However, the item in blue was reallocated from the comfort factor to the fairness factor, owing to its dominant association with the fairness factor. The item in red was completely deleted as it loaded on more than 1 factor, with scores being below 0.3 in each factor. I believe that its weak loading on inclusion factor, where it's supposed to be, can be attributed to the fact that the old boys network of exclusive white males, which is a negative item, does not exist in this organization. Nevertheless, the overall fit and the total variation explained by the 4 factors, which is 60.15, appeared satisfactory, suggesting that the scale with minor modifications was consistent with the priori factor structure. So having established the dimensions, I estimated the internal consistency of subscales by calculating reliability coefficients. As you can see from the last row, only the fairness factor exhibited an adequate internal consistency, while the reliabilities of the remaining factors were inadequate. So what conclusions can I draw from these results? Although the factor structure with a slight modification appears to be in accord with the original structure, the internal consistency of subscales is problematic. There's a possibility that items measuring those factors may not be homogeneous and collectively act as a formative scale rather than reflective. So by implication, researchers need to be extremely cautious in assuming that the scale is valid and reliable in their context. There is a need to refine the scale, at least in an Australian public sector context, thoroughly examine the relevant components, because the failure to do so can result in incorrect conclusions and even invalidate any scientific investigation. So here are my recommendations. First of all, use the empathic approach. With respect to organizational inclusion factor, consider including other attributes of inclusion, such as items related to participation in decision-making process, being a part of the consultation process, and access to mentoring programs, as those attributes appear to be more important to employees in this organization than any other attributes of inclusion. With respect to personal value of diversity factor, the existing diversity programs of an organization may also be useful in constructing the items. With respect to comfort with diversity factor, consider including comfort with other dimensions of diversity, such as religion, beliefs, or a strong foreign accent, as these are the dimensions of diversity employees feel most uncomfortable with. And then, of course, empirically test those results. So once validated, the scale can be an important tool for researchers as well as policymakers, HR professionals, and consultants, and assist them in identifying the elements of organizational diversity climate they wish to change. So these recommendations are based on the comments made by the participants during my interview sessions with them. Here are some of the comments. I am uncomfortable with other people's religion only because I don't understand them. It doesn't make me fearful, but makes me uncomfortable because I fear that I might offend them with something I may say or do. Whatever they practice doesn't bother me, but I don't want to offend anyone. Sometimes there can be an issue with language skills, specifically of those whose English is definitely not their first language. It can be challenging in points, as it makes it quite difficult communicating back and forth with them. That's what makes me uncomfortable. Thank you for your attention. If you have any questions, here is my email address. Thanks again. Enjoy your time in Montreal.